After Donald Trump announced tariffs on Canada, things went quite the opposite of what he had planned. Instead of submitting and accepting the U.S. bullying, Canada has decided to take a firm stand, especially after Donald Trump said, "Canada is the best contender to become the 51st state of the U.S." This rattled nationalism in Canada and set the stage for actions Canada would have never thought to take. Trump has already put 25% tariffs on Canada, with Canada hitting back with 25% tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods. However, Trump has revealed that 10% tariffs will be imposed on Canadian oil coming to America. After this, Trudeau had no other option than to diversify Canada's oil export base, so he did it. The result was that Canada, one of the closest allies of the U.S., struck a deal with China to export oil. Yet things don't stop here. Another groundbreaking deal has been made with Japan for Canadian energy exports. So, what really is happening and how things are changing to never be normal again? In this video, let's analyze and know about the whole story. The United States and Canada have long been in a deeply integrated energy relationship, with Canada supplying nearly 60% of U.S. oil imports and acting as the backbone of American refineries. However, that relationship is now under serious threat thanks to Donald Trump's reckless trade war. After imposing a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, Trump has antagonized America's largest energy supplier, and Canada is wasting no time in retaliating. Not only has Ottawa reimposed tariffs on U.S. goods, but it has accelerated efforts to send its oil and gas to other markets, specifically China and Japan, where demand for Canadian energy is surging. Interestingly, this move is not just a temporary slap on the wrist, but a permanent restructuring of global oil markets. By strengthening ties with Asia, Canada is making an irreversible pivot away from U.S. dependence, a decision that Trump and future American administrations may come to regret deeply. You should know that the United States has never had a more reliable or stable oil supplier than Canada. Nearly 97% of Canada's crude oil exports flow south, making Canada not just America's top oil provider, but also a key player in the stability of the U.S. energy market. The two countries' energy systems are so deeply integrated that Canada's pipeline infrastructure actually runs through U.S. territory before reaching eastern Canadian refineries. This means that for decades, Washington has enjoyed a steady flow of Canadian oil at preferential prices, reinforcing a mutually beneficial trade relationship. But that long-standing stability is now under threat. Trump's aggressive tariffs and dismissive rhetoric have forced Ottawa to reconsider its dependence on the U.S. market, pushing Canada to seek alternative buyers in Asia and Europe. And if Canada redirects even a fraction of its oil exports away from the U.S., American refineries will be left scrambling to replace millions of barrels per day. And finding an alternative supplier of heavy crude, a necessity for U.S. refineries, would not be easy. U.S. shale oil is too light for many refineries, which are designed specifically to process Canada's heavier crude blends. Countries like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, which produce similar types of oil, come with major political baggage. Venezuela remains under U.S. sanctions, and the Middle East is notorious for oil supply manipulation, with OPEC often restricting output to drive up global prices. This leaves the U.S. in a precarious position. If Canada successfully diverted its oil exports to Asia and Europe, America would be forced to pay higher global market prices for alternative crude sources, leading to a massive increase in fuel costs for consumers and industries alike. Gasoline and diesel prices in the U.S. would skyrocket. Refinery operations would become more expensive, and the already struggling U.S. energy sector would face an unprecedented crisis. To make matters worse, Canada's oil export shift isn't happening in a vacuum. While the U.S. is pushing its closest trading partner away, countries like China and Japan are aggressively stepping in to fill the gap. If Canada locks in long-term energy contracts with Asian nations, Washington may find itself permanently sidelined in the North American energy equation, a move that future U.S. administrations could struggle to reverse. Interestingly, for decades, Japan has relied heavily on oil imports from the Middle East, particularly from countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait. However, given the geopolitical instability in the region, Japan has been seeking a more secure and stable energy supplier, and Canada has quickly emerged as an ideal partner. Recognizing this opportunity, Canada has accelerated its energy negotiations with Japan, securing a deal that could permanently shift Japan's energy dependence away from the US and the Middle East. In a recent high-stakes meeting in Tokyo, Alberta's Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, held discussions with some of Japan's biggest energy firms, including JERA, Tokyo Gas, and Japan Gas Association. The discussions were not just about oil, but about a long-term energy partnership that could reshape global trade dynamics. You should know that Japan's interest in Canadian oil is strategic as well as economic. With the country transitioning away from coal and other high-emission fuels, Canadian oil and LNG provide a cleaner, more stable alternative. Unlike Middle Eastern suppliers, Canada is seen as a politically stable and reliable country, free from the risk of supply disruptions due to conflict or economic sanctions. Additionally, Canada's geographic proximity to Japan gives it a major competitive advantage. The shipping route from Alberta to Japan is significantly shorter than the one from the U.S. Gulf Coast or the Middle East, making Canadian oil cheaper and faster to transport. The significance of this deal cannot be overstated. In 2024, Canada officially began exporting LNG to Japan for the first time, marking a major turning point in global energy trade. With additional energy projects already in the pipeline, Canada is on track to become one of Japan's top energy suppliers in the coming years. This means that Japan, the world's third-largest economy, is now investing in Canada as a long-term energy partner rather than relying on American energy exports. And this isn't just happening with Japan. China is making similar moves. For decades, the United States took Canada's vast oil reserves for granted, assuming that its northern neighbor had no other viable buyers. That assumption is now being shattered, as China aggressively steps in to secure Canadian crude, taking full advantage of Trump's reckless trade war. While Japan is a new and rapidly growing player in Canada's energy exports, China's strategic moves are on a completely different level. It is actively working to lock in long-term supply contracts, permanently altering the energy map. The expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which connects Canada's oil-rich Alberta region to the Pacific coast, has dramatically increased Canada's ability to export oil to Asia. China wasted no time in capitalizing on this, seizing the opportunity to diversify its crude imports away from the Middle East and Russia. In September alone, Chinese refiners bought multiple full oil tankers of Canadian crude, marking one of the biggest shifts in global energy trade in years. And yes, this is not a one-time purchase. This is a calculated economic strategy. State-owned energy giants like PetroChina and Sinopec have begun securing long-term contracts with Canadian producers, ensuring a steady flow of crude for years to come. China's private refineries are following suit, with Rongsheng Petrochemical, one of the country's largest refiners, having purchased 4 major shipments of Canadian oil, effectively cementing China's position as one of Canada's top buyers. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, and current affairs impacting your lives. The numbers tell an even more alarming story for the United States. Canadian oil is currently $10 per barrel cheaper than Middle Eastern crude, making it an extremely attractive option for China. With the global economy still recovering and fuel prices under pressure, Chinese refiners are eager to cut costs and Canadian crude is the perfect solution. In June 2024 alone, over 187,000 barrels per day of Canadian oil were shipped to China, a staggering increase compared to previous years. By 2025, Chinese imports of Canadian crude are expected to surge another 50%, according to industry estimates. For the U.S., this is a nightmare scenario. The country that once depended on cheap, stable Canadian oil is now watching China absorb those shipments instead. And the most dangerous part is that these contracts cannot be undone. If China locks in decades-long supply deals with Canada, Washington may never again have access to the reliable energy supply it once took for granted. With both Japan and China aggressively buying Canadian oil, the U.S. may soon find itself in the worst possible position. This would be in the form of losing out on its most stable energy partner while watching its global rivals strengthen their own supply chains. This is why Trump's trade war could end up being one of the most disastrous economic miscalculations in U.S. history. By pushing Canada away with tariffs and hostile rhetoric, Washington has essentially forced its closest ally into the arms of Asia. However, Trump is not backing down. Rather, he has doubled down on the U.S., not needing Canadian oil. This shift isn't just a temporary reaction to Trump's tariffs. It is a long-term restructuring of energy trade relationships. Even if the U.S. eventually tries to restore ties with Canada, the damage may already be done. If Japan and China fully integrate Canadian oil into their economies, they won't need the U.S. anymore, and Washington will have no one to blame but itself. But how did Canada manage to find new patterns? Well, the U.S. had a direct role to play. For decades, Canada was trapped in an energy bottleneck. Nearly all of its oil had to be sent to the U.S., not because of economic choice, but because of a lack of infrastructure to ship crude anywhere else. This gave the U.S. enormous leverage over Canadian oil, ensuring that Washington could always dictate the terms of the trade. But Trump's tariff war changed everything. Faced with increasing economic hostility from the U.S., Canada is pushing ahead with massive pipeline expansions that will permanently reduce its dependence on American buyers. Ottawa is no longer waiting for Washington's approval. It is actively building a new energy network that will make Canada one of the world's most independent and globally connected oil exporters. One of the most ambitious projects being revived is the Energy East pipeline, which would transport oil from Alberta directly to Canada's east coast, bypassing the U.S. entirely. Once completed, this pipeline would allow Canada to export crude directly to European markets, giving it a new and powerful buyer base. For the European Union, this is a game changer. Currently, Europe is heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil, and recent geopolitical tensions have made that reliance increasingly dangerous. Canada's Energy East pipeline provides Europe with a stable, democratic, and reliable alternative, one that is free from the volatility of OPEC politics and Russian aggression. If Energy East reaches full capacity, Canada could replace a significant portion of U.S. oil sales with European buyers, cutting Washington out of the equation entirely. While Europe is one destination, China remains Canada's biggest priority, and that's where the Northern Gateway pipeline comes in. Originally canceled due to political opposition in 2016, this project is now being quietly revived as Canada looks to strengthen its Asian energy partnerships. The Northern Gateway pipeline would send crude directly to British Columbia's Pacific ports, where it could then be shipped straight to China, Japan, and other Asian markets. This would give Canada full independence from the U.S. pipeline system, making it impossible for Washington to interfere in its energy trade. China has already signaled strong interest in financing and supporting the project, recognizing its strategic importance. If Northern Gateway is completed, China will have an even stronger foothold in Canada's energy market, further reducing American influence. What's most striking is that this shift is now permanent. The moment Canada completes these pipelines, it will never again be at the mercy of U.S. trade policies. Trump may have forced Canada's hand, but in doing so, he may have permanently weakened America's grip on global oil markets. Trump's economic policies have turned Canada from America's closest energy ally into a rising global energy powerhouse with stronger ties to Asia and Europe. Instead of securing U.S. energy dominance, Trump's tariffs have accelerated Canada's diversification, pushing it into the arms of China, Japan, and the European Union. Now the damage is already done. In a few short years, Canada has diversified its energy exports away from the U.S., reducing Washington's leverage. It has also secured massive oil deals with China and Japan, locking in sales that the U.S. can never undo. Furthermore, accelerated pipeline expansions will allow Canada to export directly to global markets, cutting out U.S. infrastructure entirely. However, all this will be at the cost of the U.S. as its refining sector will be weakened, making American fuel more expensive and less competitive on the global market. Perhaps most ironically, Trump assumed Canada had no other options. He assumed Canada would beg for relief, that it would never dare to retaliate. Instead, Ottawa has chosen a completely different path, one that makes America weaker, not stronger. Now experts question whether the trade war is worth it. Trump claimed his tariffs would strengthen the U.S. economy. But instead, they may have cost America its most reliable energy supplier forever. Future U.S. administrations may struggle for decades to repair this damage, while Canada, China, and Japan continue to strengthen their energy ties without Washington's interference. Trump may not realize it yet, but he might have just pushed Canada into becoming one of the world's most influential energy powers without the United States in the picture at all. What do you think? Should Trump give up the idea of putting harsh tariffs on Canada to prevent losing a key ally? Or do you feel Trump won't mind and will ensure Canada suffers, so his idea of a Canada as the 51st state of the U.S. can become a reality? In the comments section right below, share your thoughts on what if Canada becomes an ally of countries like China, giving them access to the U.S. because of its shared borders with the U.S. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, changing world order, and current affairs. Things you need to stay informed. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.